Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the United States Army Officer Candidate School Hall of Fame induction ceremony for the class of 2016. Please join me in welcoming the Commandant of the Officer Candidate School, Lieutenant Colonel Mark C. Andres.
Lieutenant General Retired Kinzer, Honorable Duke Doubleday, Major General Savre, Mr. Sando, Brigadier General Smith, Colonel Carty, Colonel Streeter, Sergeant Major Angulo, distinguished visitors, Hall of Fame inductees, alumni, candidates, and friends and family of OCS. On behalf of Brigadier General Eric Wesley, the Commanding General of the Maneuver Center of Excellence, thank you for attending today's very special ceremony. In 1958, the Commanding General of Fort Benning established the OCS Hall of Fame to honor the contributions. Wrong person saying it. So we rehearsed so well. We rehearsed 1958 and everyone executed. So I'll just go to the next sentence. The U.S. Army Officer Candidate School is one of 3 commissioning sources for officers into the United States Army. It's a critical part of the Army, providing officers into all 17 basic branches and all 3 components of the total Army: the regular Army, Army Reserve, and National Guard. Throughout its 74, soon to be 75-year history, OCS has developed a reputation for commissioning the best company-grade officers during times of our nation's wars. And the alumni that we honor today represent the best of our past and more importantly, set the standard for future generations of OCS graduates to uphold. Now, before I introduce our guest speaker, I'd like to thank a few groups of people who have made this happen. First, to the OCS Alumni Association, led by Colonel Retired John Einhoff here on the stage, who constantly support the officer candidates and are critical to our success. I'd like to thank our many sponsors and the Alumni Association and the Hall of Fame. You saw many of the companies up here and organizations that were listed at the start of the ceremony. However, I'd like to single out the National Infantry Museum, as they not only did a fantastic job supporting our Hall of Fame, but they also support the candidates each and every class, whether they come here for their class formal or not. I would like to thank the leaders of Fort Benning and the greater Columbus, Phoenix City area for their continued support to our candidates. This Tri-County area helps develop our officer candidates each and every class, and today's no exception. And finally, I'd like to thank the cadre, civilians, and officer candidates of Officer Candidate School, because they busted their tails to make this a great day for the alumni and our inductees. Normally I do that like in 3 separate claps and it gets a bit repetitive, so there we go. But now I have the distinct honor of introducing our guest speaker, Lieutenant General Retired Joseph W. Kinzer. Lieutenant General Kinzer was born on 7 July 1939 in Westminster, Maryland. He enlisted in the Army in 1959 and served at Fort Benning, Georgia, Fort Myers, Virginia, and Europe before being commissioned through OCS at Fort Benning, Georgia in 1964. General Kinzer is a graduate of the Infantry Officer Candidate School, the Armor Officer Advanced Course, Command and General Staff College, and the Army War College. A light fighter to the Corps, during his 39-year career, Lieutenant General Retired Kinzer led and commanded U.S. soldiers from platoon to numbered Army level in the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, 24th U.S. Corps, 18th Airborne Corps, U.S. Army South, Task Force South, Headquarters Department of the Army, U.S. Forces and United Nations Forces Haiti, and finally 5th U.S. Army. Additionally, during his 2 tours in Vietnam, he advised the 7th Airborne Battalion of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. His military decorations include the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, Army Distinguished Service Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster, Legion of Merit with 2 Oak Leaf Clusters, Bronze Star Medal with V device and 2 Oak Leaf Clusters, the Air Medal, Meritorious Service Medal with 2 Oak Leaf Clusters, the Army Commendation Medal with 2 Oak Leaf Clusters, and the Good Conduct Medal. He is also a recipient of the Combat Infantryman's Badge, the Expert Infantryman's Badge, the Air Assault Badge, and the Master Parachutist Badge. General Kinzer is married to the former Bonnie S. Booker of Danville, Virginia, and they have 2 grown children, Joe Jr. of Southport, North Carolina, and Amy Garner of Hickory, North Carolina. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome our guest speaker, Lieutenant General Retired Joseph W. Kinzer.
I got it here someplace. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. To say that I'm overwhelmed by what he just said is an understatement. If I could do it all over again, I would. As long as I could do it with the same people. Because America's Army is people. I don't care what kind of machinery we have, it's about people. Mark did a good job of recognizing everybody, so I'm just going to do one fell sweep. Distinguished guest and leadership of the Maneuver Center for Excellence, fellow troopers, ladies and gentlemen, and members of the class of 2016 OCS Hall of Fame. I'm just proud, like Minnie Pearl said, just so proud to be here. I got the call about 3 months ago asking me if I would return to Fort Benning. And without hesitation, you bet, sign me up, I'm your man. So here I am. Before I get into my remarks, though, I'd like to preface my remarks with a word of thanks to Almighty God for making this day possible. Amen. For Him, all things are possible. I'd also like to thank the cadre of the 3rd Battalion, 11th Infantry, Sergeant Major Dudas and his people, the candidates that made this thing possible here. These things just don't happen. A lot of work, blood, sweat, and tears go into getting it organized, and for heaven's sakes, the last minute changes. We've had a few of those this morning and this afternoon. I started my career here at Fort Benning in 1959 at Kelly Hill. Private D Company, 1st Battalion, 87th Airborne, 87th Battle Group of Infantry. 6 months on Kelly Hill, and from there I went to Germany with D Company, 2nd Battle Group, 38th Infantry in the 3rd Division in Schweinfurt. I won't get into much of that history, but suffice to say that I really enjoyed my tour in Germany and being here at Fort Benning. Now, I don't do much public speaking in my retired role. I became an avid golfer. For the last 18 years, I live in the middle of 4 golf courses. I can be on any one of them in 5 minutes. But after 13 years of Monday, Wednesday, and Friday golf, I burned out. I was like Forrest Gump when he was running out in the West, you know. And he stopped, and everybody goes, "Whoa, what happened?" He said he didn't want to do it anymore. And that's kind of the way I felt about golf. I play in a tournament from time to time, but I enjoy it. I've got a 23-year-old grandson who aspires to be a professional golfer, so I'm going to take lessons from him. But in any event, I had some sage advice as I commanded the 3rd Brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, from my chaplain, Doug Carver. Doug was a super soldier. He ended up being the chief of chaplains and did a tremendous job of that. And he told me one day, he said, "Sir, any good speech needs a good opening and a good closing, and a piece in the middle needs to be real tight, close to those 2 ends." So I'll do my best, Doug. As I did some research on public speaking a while back, I ran across Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. And how many people know how many sentences is in the Gettysburg Address? Anybody? 10. But I'm not as eloquent as Abraham Lincoln, for sure. Don't purport to be. The other story I'd like to tell you, the shortest speech I've ever heard of was given by General Jim Gavin to the 82nd Airborne Division on his occasion of division review. He was invited back after he retired in a real hot day in May, and we're getting ready for that next month at Fort Bragg. The division review is a big thing for the 82nd Paratroopers. 18,000 of them on parade, an awesome sight to see. General Gavin is alleged to have said when he mounted the reviewing stand, "Troopers of the 82nd, you look magnificent. It's hot. Pass and review." In his letter to me, inviting me down to be the guest speaker today, Major General Miller advised me that my speech should be 15 to 20 minutes and on a topic of my choosing. And I said, well, let's see, let's go to the top of the list, war stories. I said, no, that's out. Too many war stories now. So I kind of fumbled around a little bit, and I figured out what I'm going to talk about today, and I'll tell you about it in a minute, but I'm just honored to be here. I almost had tears in my eyes when he was talking about my assignments and all the good things that happened to me as a soldier. And it's overwhelming, guys. Let me just say that I'm honored to be part of your special day here at Fort Benning as a graduate of OCS, a great institution. I'd do it all over again if I could do it with the same people, as I said. Today, you join the ranks of a select group of soldier leaders, a new regiment, if you will. Today, you are recognized as distinguished members of the elite of the Army, of America's Army, and in some cases, the civilian community as well. Your selection as a member of the OCS Hall of Fame speaks volumes as to your successful service, your character, your loyalty to your country and to the Army and this institution. Only the very best are selected, and you've made the cut. You are, in fact, among the very best, and I congratulate you on that. As I mentioned, I had a tough time deciding on what to talk about. And I decided after much thinking and kicking around, didn't consult with my wife like some guys do, because she'd have given me, a mouthful. But in any event, I thought about the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. And I said, no, that doesn't fit. We're not in school here. So I said, we got to change the definition, or not the definitions, but the meaning. So I came up with the idea of remember, reflect, and resolve. And that's what I want to talk about. For a minute, let us think back over our experiences here in OCS in terms of the 3 R's. Let us remember, let us reflect, and let us resolve. Remember the first day when you reported in? They made me peel my E6 stripes off in the front leaning rest position. And I said, hey, what kind of deal is this? Oh. Remember the challenges and how we met them day in and day out. Remember too many things to do and not enough time to do them. And all along, all the TACs wanted us to figure out was how to set priorities and determine what needs to be done first. And it was easy after we figured that out. Remember the lasting friendships we made with our fellow classmates. Some of them, most of them are still alive, in my case, and I'm in contact with many, many of them. Remember the bonds we established with our fellow classmates as well, lasting bonds. Remember wondering if we could make it through 23 weeks, and that's how long our course was. I quit 4 times a week and didn't have nerve enough to tell the TAC officer I was leaving. So I stayed. And we had six TAC officers in those days. They were tough guys. Remember the Blue Day parade and no more double time, thank God. It took the Army about 40 years to figure out it's bad to run in combat boots. Running shoes are better. Remember the musical rooms. They made us change rooms about every 4 weeks. And they put out the notice, and we came in from training, and looked, the next morning you had to be down the hall about 3 rooms. For some reason, I was the only guy in our company that didn't have to move for the whole time. I don't know, it was a stroke of luck or divine intervention or what, but I had 5 roommates. Unfortunately, 3 of them were killed in Vietnam. Pete Larson, Joe Kuby, and Marshall Hurst. Hurst was the first guy in our company to be killed with the 1st Infantry Division. Remember graduation day and the gold bars of a lieutenant and the responsibilities that come with leading soldiers. Remember orders to your first duty assignment. My first duty assignment was to 5th Student Battalion, the one I just about to graduate from. And I didn't want to go back in there and be a TAC officer. I thought the Army trained me to be a platoon leader. So I went to see the battalion commander, and he gave me a ration of stuff and about how good I was and how short they were on lieutenants. And I told him, Colonel, that's your problem, not mine. Because I had a letter in my hand from Jack Norton, who was the deputy commandant here at the school, that said, if you finished in the top 10% of your class, you could pick your first assignment. So I was number 7 out of 130, so I went in and said, I want to cash this in. And it took me about 2 weeks. I got it done. I went to the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. But yeah, orders to your duty station. And last but not least, let's not forget those that we lost. Never forget those. Remember them. So remember, reflect. Think back, if you will, on those days and months wherein you matured as a soldier leader and how you met the day-to-day challenges of OCS. Think about or reflect on what you learned in terms of setting priorities and management of time. And that's all the tax wanted you to figure out, and we got it done. On how proud we were when we pinned on the second lieutenant bars. I remember in Building 4 where we were this morning, my dad and my wife pinned on my lieutenant bars. Dad's gone now, but my wife's still with me. How excited you were when you learned of your first assignment, the one you really wanted. Reflect on how the experience of OCS framed your life's journey, both in and out of uniform, and many of you are here today, are not in uniform today, and did not retire from the Army, but yet you're still serving America, and we're all proud of that. So the other R is resolve, and here's where we need your help, folks. Resolve that we will remain loyal to this institution called Officer Candidate School at Fort Benning, Georgia. Resolve that we will seek opportunities to support the OCS program, and there's opportunity to do that in your local communities across the board. Resolve to do your part to ensure OCS remains a viable source of commissioned officers for the United States Army. We've got a great reputation. We can't afford not to continue to serve it. Resolve that we will support the telling of the OCS story, and here's where you can come in as well. My intent with the 3 R's, remember, arithmetic, getting ahead of myself. Remember, reflect, and resolve should be your watchwords when it comes to talking about OCS. They are mine anyway. So in closing, I hope in some small way that the 3 R's will ever help you to think about your time in OCS and support of the program. Thanks again for the honor and privilege to be with you this afternoon. I wish you all the best, and a special congratulations to the class of 2016. Before I forget, B Company of the 11th Battalion, or the youngsters you've been seeing buzz around here with the white ascots on, they did a great job, and I think we owe them a round of applause. And so with that, I'll close my remarks. Well, what did Forrest Gump say when he was giving a speech on the mall in Washington, and they finally plugged the wire back in, and he was saying, he says, that's all I got to say about that. God bless you.
The Officer Candidate School Hall of Fame was established in 1958 to recognize distinguished graduates of OCS. The Hall of Fame building, Weigel Hall, was named after Second Lieutenant Thomas W. Weigel, the first OCS graduate to receive the Medal of Honor. Currently, there are over 2,000 members of the OCS Hall of Fame. Today, we will induct 32 more members. Each inductee will receive an OCS Hall of Fame induction certificate. The OCS Hall of Fame Class of 2016 inductees are Colonel William E. Aldridge. Colonel William E. Aldridge was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School Class 49-67 on August 28, 1967. He served in Vietnam as a Special Forces officer and later transitioned to the Armor Branch in the National Guard. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond S. Angeli. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond S. Angeli was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 1-66, on January 14, 1966. After his honorable service, Lieutenant Colonel Angeli became the Secretary of the Department of Community Affairs for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. He is the current president of Lackawanna College. Colonel John E. Bircher III. Colonel John E. Bircher III was commissioned as a military intelligence officer upon graduation from the Officer Candidate School on March 28, 1963. After spending a majority of his career stationed abroad, Colonel Bircher's final assignment was Political Military Advisor, Middle East Bureau, Department of State, Washington, D.C. Captain Richard E. Boyer. Captain Richard E. Boyer was commissioned as a military intelligence officer upon graduation from the Officer Candidate School, Class 4-65. After serving in the active and reserve components, Dr. Boyer served as an attorney, judge, and New Hampshire State Senator. Dr. Boyer is currently in his 15th year as a professor at Wayland Baptist University. Colonel Philip W. Clayton. Colonel Philip W. Clayton was commissioned as a Transportation Corps officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class OCRC 2-83 on October 18, 1983. Colonel Clayton served in Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Ecuador, Afghanistan, and Iraq. He is currently the Construction and Facility Management Officer, Joint Force Headquarters, Alabama Army National Guard, Montgomery, Alabama. Major John E. Kleckner, Sr. Major John E. Kleckner, Sr. was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Infantry Officer Candidate School, Class 1-66, on January 14, 1966. Major Kleckner has served his nation and reflected great credit upon OCS through his actions of valor in Vietnam with the Special Forces, and he continues to do so with his work with Veterans Affairs. He has also served in a presidentially appointed sub-cabinet position in the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Colonel William Clerkin. Colonel William J. Clerkin was commissioned as a Medical Service Corps officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 4-85, on August 23, 1985. Colonel Clerkin's most recent duty assignment is Deputy Commander, Joint Intelligence Coordination Staff, Washington, D.C. Lieutenant Colonel Peter M. Conity. Lieutenant Colonel Peter M. Conity was commissioned an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 1-66, on January 14, 1966. Lieutenant Colonel Conity continued to serve after his career in the military within the state legislature and by representing multiple Veterans Affairs legislative advocacy groups. Colonel Troy Coronado. Colonel Troy Coronado was commissioned as an Armor Corps officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 4-88, on June 24, 1988. Colonel Coronado served for over 25 years in the active component and multiple National Guard state bureaus. Lieutenant Colonel James F. Dabney. Lieutenant Colonel James F. Dabney was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 4-63, on October 9, 1963. Lieutenant Colonel Dabney's last assignment was Analyst Comptroller of the Army, Director of Operations and Maintenance, Army Headquarters, Department of the Army, Washington, D.C. Accepting on his behalf is Mr. Gunther Bachley, who was honored to accept the award on behalf of Delta Company, 4th Battalion, 12th Infantry of the 199th Light Infantry Brigade, the Red Catchers. Second Lieutenant Harold B. Durham. Second Lieutenant Harold B. Durham was commissioned as an artillery officer upon graduation from the Artillery and Missile Officer Candidate School at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, in Class 01-67 on December 17, 1966. He served as a forward observer in Charlie Battery, 6th Battalion, 15th Artillery, 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam. Second Lieutenant Durham was killed in action and was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor for his gallant and intrepid actions in close combat. Accepting on his behalf are his sister, Mrs. Jeannie Durham, and his brother, Mr. John Durham. Lieutenant Colonel Edward T. Flash. Lieutenant Colonel Edward Thomas Flash was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 4 in Brisbane, Australia, on October 4, 1944. During his inspiring life and military career, Lieutenant Colonel Flash jumped into Corregidor with the 2nd of the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment, where he personally saved lives after sustaining injuries by direct fire during an initial rescue. Accepting on his behalf is his son, Thomas E. Flash. Colonel Jerry R. Fry. Colonel Jerry Raymond Fry was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 1-66, on January 14, 1966. Over the course of Colonel Fry's exemplary career, he commanded 3 infantry companies and the U.S. Army Parachute Team. He also served as a professor of military science and foreign area officer at embassies across 3 countries. His most notable awards are the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Silver Star, and the Distinguished Service Cross. Captain Florent A. Groberg. Captain Florent A. Groberg was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 012-08, on December 3, 2008. Captain Groberg is a recent recipient of the Medal of Honor for his conspicuous gallantry during a suicide bomber attack in the Kunar province of Afghanistan. First Lieutenant Daniel A. Hennessy. First Lieutenant Daniel A. Hennessy was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School in July 1965. First Lieutenant Hennessy received the Distinguished Service Cross, posthumously, for his extraordinary heroism while leading his platoon in direct combat against the Viet Cong. Although fatally wounded, he courageously continued to direct his men until finally turning over command to his platoon sergeant. Accepting on his behalf is Mr. George Bannon. Colonel Robert M. Klein. Colonel Robert M. Klein was commissioned as a military police officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School Class 2-89 on March 9, 1989. Colonel Klein has served as a military police officer, psychological operations officer, West Point history professor, and is the current director of the Executive Strategy Group in the Office of the Chief of Staff of the Army. Colonel Timothy J. Loney. Colonel Timothy J. Loney was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 3-86, on August 8, 1986. Colonel Loney's last assignment was Assistant Chief of Staff, 8th U.S. Army, and he continues to serve as the Regional Coordinator for the Michigan Veterans Affairs Agency. Lieutenant Colonel James Madison McGarity III. Lieutenant Colonel James M. McGarity was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Infantry Officer Candidate School, Class 4-72, on June 20th. On June 20th, 1972. The Honorable Jim McGarity now serves as the County Judge of the 20th Judicial Circuit in Florida. He retired as a Lieutenant Colonel after 23 years of service, during which he commanded multiple units and deployed in support of Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Andre Moore. Lieutenant Colonel Michael Andre Moore was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from the Officer Candidate School, Class 1-62, on October 18th, 1961. He is the Silver Star and Purple Heart recipient due to gallantry he displayed during the Vietnam War. First Lieutenant Daniel A. Nixon. First Lieutenant Daniel A. Nixon was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 9-67, on February 7th, 1967. He was medically retired due to combat injuries sustained in Vietnam. Since then, he has retired from a medical career of over 30 years and was president of the 199th Light Infantry Association, the Red Catchers. Colonel Matthew Rudy. Colonel Matthew H. Rudy was commissioned as a Transportation Corps officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 3-93, on May 14, 1993. Serving all over the world, Colonel Rudy has deployed to Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq. He is currently the commander of the 916th Support Brigade, Fort Irwin, California. Colonel Thomas P. Ribzik. Colonel Thomas P. Ribzik was commissioned as a quartermaster officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 5-67, on March 23, 1967. Colonel Ribzik was the co-author of the Master Plan for Airdrop Future Systems, which led to the development of the Air Cargo Delivery System known as JPADS. Without this concept, many operations, especially those in austere and unreachable areas of Afghanistan, would have been impossible. Major General Kent D. Savre. Major General Kent D. Savre commissioned as an engineer officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 3-85, on July 26, 1985. Since April 2015, he has commanded the Maneuver Support Center of Excellence at Fort Leonard Wood. Previously, he commanded the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers North Atlantic Division, which protects America's water resources and mitigates risk from disasters across the Northeast, Europe, and Africa. Major General Savre led the Army's response and recovery efforts during Hurricane Sandy. Colonel Samuel Williams. Colonel Samuel Williams was commissioned as a Signal Corps officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 1-91, on January 18, 1991. Colonel Williams is currently the commander of the 8th Brigade, United States Army Cadet Command. First Lieutenant Randolph M. Wright. First Lieutenant Randolph M. Wright was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 34-69, on May 14, 1969. First Lieutenant Wright is an international trade lawyer recognized as one of the nation's top lawyers by International Trade Business Magazine and maintains the highest rating on the Martindale-Hubbell Client Peer Review. He is currently the president of Vietnam Veterans of America, Detroit Chapter 9. This year, the following inductees were unable to attend this ceremony. We are proud to recognize the following distinguished alumni as members of the OCS Hall of Fame. Colonel Richard K. Otto. Colonel Richard K. Otto was commissioned as a Transportation Corps officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 1-87, on February 20th, 1987. His most recent assignment was Assistant Professor, Eisenhower School, National Defense University, Fort McNair, Washington, D.C. Colonel Michael F. Dupra. Colonel Michael F. Dupra was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 02-89, on March 9, 1989. Colonel Dupra's most recent assignment was the Director, Analysis and Requirements Headquarters, Training and Doctrine Command, Fort Eustis, Virginia. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen E. Fitzgerald. Lieutenant Colonel Stephen E. Fitzgerald was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 45-67, on August 4, 1968. Lieutenant Colonel Fitzgerald served in the Special Forces and the Conventional Army. He continues to serve this nation as a Kansas State Senator. Colonel Robert C. George, Jr. Colonel Robert Charlton George, Jr. was commissioned as an infantry officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 20-69, on June 20th, 1969. Colonel George served 28 years, combined active component and National Guard, and continues to serve the Army by developing future soldiers as the Director of Army Instruction, where he supervises 9 JROTC programs. Major Robert T. Hastings. Major Robert T. Hastings, Jr. was commissioned as an aviation officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 87-1, on February 20th, 1987. Major Hastings served as an aviation and public affairs officer. He continued to serve our nation as Assistant Secretary for Defense for Public Affairs under President George W. Bush and currently serves as the Chief of Staff of Bell Helicopter. Colonel Larry Locke. Colonel Larry Locke was commissioned as a Finance Corps officer upon graduation from Officer Candidate School, Class 5-84, on December 19, 1984. Colonel Locke retired after 32 years of federal service. His final position was Chief of Compensation Entitlements, G1, Headquarters, Department of the Army. First Lieutenant Robert L. Poxon. First Lieutenant Robert L. Poxon was commissioned as an armor officer upon graduation from Armor Officer Candidate School, Class 28-67, at Fort Knox, Kentucky, on October 13, 1967. First Lieutenant Poxon was killed in action on June 2, 1969, while serving as platoon leader in the Dai Ninh province of Afghanistan. First Lieutenant Poxon received the Medal of Honor for the indomitable will he displayed in leading the assault of a bunker complex. During his assault, First Lieutenant Poxon was seriously wounded on 3 separate occasions, but continued to lead his men until mortally wounded. We would also like to recognize our ceremony's guest speaker for his assistance in this memorable event. Lieutenant Colonel Andres will now present an OCS plaque to Lieutenant General Kinzer.
Sir, on behalf of the officers, non-commissioned officers, and candidates of Officer Candidate School, thank you very much for presiding today. We really are inspired by your words. Thank you, sir.
Colonel Ionoff will now present a token of appreciation from the United States Army Officer Candidate School Alumni Association.
General, on behalf of the United States Army Officer Candidate School Alumni Association, it gives me great pleasure and personal satisfaction to present this painting that depicts the archways that are at the entrance and the exit of the current OCS battalion. Thank you for your service.
I gotta tell you folks, before I leave, this guy and I were battalion commanders together in the 3rd Brigade, 101st Division. We didn't go to war, but if we ever had, I'd want John Inoff on my left or right flank. John, thank you for that.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and join us in the singing of the OCS alma mater, and then remain standing for the Army's song and the departure of the official party. The OCS alma mater!
The call is clear, we must meet the task.